Welcome back, everyone. Well, you may have seen some headlines or a TikTok video or something else on social media related to a certain Austrian dictator from the early to mid 20th century, whose name shall not be named, at least not yet, in the first 30 seconds or so, because YouTube likes to demonetize such things. But you may have seen the headlines related to his anatomy and been wondering what that's all about and thinking, man, it just sounds kind of like sensationalist. It sounds like the kind of thing you see in tabloids, and you just dismissed it. Or you thought it was really interesting and you took it at face value. Well, I'm here to cut through all of that and give you the facts, because the fact is that a DNA test was done on some of the blood from a piece of the couch from the bunker in Berlin. And I've known about this for about a year or so, because my friend Eric, who runs the Gettysburg Museum of History, is actually the one who provided the sample. And he told me about this last year, as well as telling me some of the results of the tests, which were already known at that point. And by the time you're watching this, there will have been a documentary that has aired in the UK related to this. And there's going to be a different version of that documentary coming to the United States, I think sometime in early 2026 on the History Channel. So what I wanted to do, though, is to cut through all of what you're seeing on social media, all of what you're seeing in the headlines, and tell you what was really found in this DNA test, because some of it's pretty remarkable. Some of it puts to rest some things that have been speculated about for a long time. And unfortunately, there's some really good stuff that the media has glossed over for the sake of talking about anatomy. So let's go ahead and dive into the details of what exactly this DNA test was found and how we know that it even belongs to that Austrian dictator in the first place. So before we even get into exactly what the results show, let's talk first of all about this DNA, where it came from, how we know it belonged to Hitler, those sorts of things. So first of all, this piece of this couch, which is the couch that he shot himself on in the Führer bunker in Berlin as the Soviet Union, the forces of the Soviet Union, the Red Army, were closing in on that position. There's this couch that was down in the bunker that was in his private quarters. And a little while after the events of April 30th, 1945, the Red Army actually invited members of the U.S. media to come to the site, and they went down in, and it was dark, and there's actually this photograph that was taken, I think, by Time magazine of these men, and you can see he's got a candle, and this guy back here has a flashlight, and of course the flash from the camera lit everything up, but it was very dark at the time this was taken. And this shows not only the couch, but the blood stain. If you look at a more zoomed out black and white version of this photo, you'll actually see that the blood stain is there. And this is the actual piece of that fabric that was provided for the DNA analysis. So the guy's name was Colonel Roswell Rosengren. He was an officer in Eisenhower's Public Information Office. He was one of the first Americans to be granted access to the bunker. He removed the swatch directly using a pocket knife. He kept it as a war trophy. His grandson, who was also interviewed for this documentary, and if you want to read all of this, this is on Gettysburg Museum of History site, and I'll put a link down in the description so you can read all the details for yourself. His grandson also was interviewed for this, but we know that we have a good chain of custody from the time that it belonged to Rosengren all the way up until Eric got his hands on it. And he was then asked to provide this. And in order to extract DNA from the blood, they had to destroy a small piece of that fabric. And Eric agreed to do that with the understanding, among other things, that they would use it to definitively prove that Hitler did indeed die in that bunker. And so how do you do that? Well, you do that using something called Y chromosome DNA. It's a well-known fact that the closest male line relatives to Adolf Hitler are Americans. His half-brother, who lived in the UK, had a son named William Patrick Hitler, Willie Hitler, who served in the U.S. Navy during World War II. This is a nephew of the dictator. He had 3 sons who changed their name to Stuart Houston for obvious reasons. and it was through that line that they were able to get a saliva sample. Now, without getting too technical about DNA, there are different kinds of DNA. There's autosomal DNA, there's mitochondrial DNA, there's Y chromosome DNA, and that's what we're concerned about. And I have experience with this because I used Y chromosome DNA to prove who my biological father was. Because Y chromosome DNA is only passed down through the male line. So my Y chromosome DNA is the same as my father, and it's the same as his other sons. My sons have the same Y chromosome DNA as my brother's sons do, and so on and so forth. So if you can get a match from this blood stain, prove that it's blood, which they did, human blood, which they did, and you can match the Y chromosome DNA of that to the Y chromosome DNA of his known relatives here in the States, then you can prove that that blood stain is blood that came from a male member of Adolf Hitler's immediate family. Now, who else? At that point, you have to rule out pretty much anybody else. There's nobody else in his family, male line family, who would have even been in the bunker in the first place and who would have shot themselves on the couch. So at that point, you can put to rest the idea that he escaped and ended up in Argentina or anything like that. So we've got a chain of custody. We know where the swatch came from. We know all of the people who have had it since then. And now we know that it matches human blood that comes from a male member of the Hitler family. They also were able to prove, among other things, that there was no Jewish ancestry in that male line, which has been speculated as well over time. So they also, there's some other stuff we're not going to talk too much about like they checked on transfer pattern and surface penetration and stuff, forensics to do with, did this come from a gunshot wound? It's consistent with a person collapsing onto the couch immediately after being shot, which makes sense if you think about how that was. And so it did not match staged blood droplets, saying that there was some kind of hoax. So there's a lot of other stuff in here that I'm not going to talk too much about. If you want to see more details of all of this stuff, by the time this video has gone live, we will have done a live stream with Eric, with JD from the History Underground over on his channel, and I'm going to link that in the description as well, so you can go back and watch our Q&A where we talked in depth about this stuff. I mainly want to focus on what the media has been sensationalizing, which is what they analyzed and what they found out from this blood about markers. Because there are certain markers, as we learn more about DNA, there are certain markers that show a predisposition or a likelihood of certain diseases or birth defects or tendencies towards certain kinds of mental health issues, those kinds of things. So what did the documentary show related to those things, and what did the DNA results show? So a couple of things. They explored some genetic predispositions, including the possibility he had ADHD and autism spectrum tendencies, which this is one of the things I heard about a year ago about this from Eric. He's in the top 1% of genetic propensity for bipolar disorder. Now, I understand that there are a lot of reasons why people end up with mental health issues. I'm not saying that this proves he was nuts because he was genetically predisposed to be nuts. But these kinds of things do make it more likely that you could end up with those things. And when you combine that with other factors like the way that you're raised, your experiences growing up, the things that happen in your life, because listen, excuse me, there are plenty of people who are bipolar and schizophrenic and don't end up mass murdering dictators, okay? The vast majority of people with those things don't end up that way. So this is not an attempt to excuse or to somehow give him a pass while he couldn't help it. No, because there's a lot of other factors. But this does show there's a strong likelihood that he was dealing with a number of serious mental health defects in addition to the other things in his life. Antisocial, psychopathic behavioral markers, etc. These are, again, genetic predispositions, not diagnoses. We're not saying he was definitely bipolar. What we're saying is he was very likely to be genetically predisposed to be bipolar. Okay. Now, this is the part that everybody's talking about. This is the one that everybody wants to focus on. I get it. The media is looking for clicks. It's just like YouTube, right? You know, you're looking for the clickbait headline that everybody's going to talk about. And the clickbait headline that everybody's saying is, oh my gosh, Adolf Hitler had a micropenis. No, he didn't. And it's very likely he did not, even with this. But let's take a look and see what it does say, okay? So he had the Kallmann syndrome variant, which is a variant in your DNA that means that you're likely to have had Kallmann syndrome. And if you have Kallmann syndrome, you're 90% likely to have a single undescended testicle, which we know from previous medical information that Hitler likely had. This is not an altogether uncommon thing, and it doesn't in any way mean that he was somehow compensating, okay? It's a pretty common thing. And in this case, it's a 9 out of 10 chance based on this genetic marker that he had that. And we already kind of knew that. The British had a song about Hitler only having one testicle because there was a 1920s medical report that said that was the case. So, yeah, like it says here, historical medical records already documented that he had an undescended testicle. Now, only 10% of people with Kallmann syndrome have a micropenis, as it's called. Okay, so these headlines that say he was likely to have had, or it's a good chance, no, it's not. It's most likely he didn't, okay? 10% chance. And out of all of what we just talked about, that's what people are focused on, is that 10% chance of that, not the bipolar, not the schizophrenic, not the fact that we proved that Hitler died in that bunker, that's his blood, and that it's all consistent with death by suicide with a handgun. Those should be the headlines. Those should be the things we're talking about, not this, okay? So like Eric said here, this is dubious, it's speculative, it's medically unsupported. This is not the significant finding, but unfortunately it has overshadowed some really significant stuff that has come out of all of this. So I want to just encourage you, and this goes to a larger idea, right? Don't base your opinions on things and your informed ideas on things on a headline. Read the articles and then go and find 5 other articles about that and then go digging for yourself. I'm not saying you should automatically just disbelieve anything that you read, but what I'm saying is trust but verify, right? So if you saw the headline, micropenis, and then people ran with it, if you actually opened up the article for those same headlines, you would see 10% chance of that, right? That changes the whole trajectory of the story. And then you start digging, and then those same articles that was the headline would have like a half a sentence in there about Y chromosome DNA from saliva from his relatives proved it was a match. And that was like the byline. That was like the afterthought. It wasn't the main headline, which is nuts to me. So I'll put the links, watch our live stream, read the details of all of this, because there's a ton of stuff here about exactly what happened and what the real breakthroughs and the real resolutions from this are. And then I would encourage you to be watching for that documentary when it airs here in the States next spring, or watch the one that already aired in the UK. But keep in mind that people want to focus on what they want to focus on and not necessarily the whole truth. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. I am part of the advisory board for the Gettysburg Museum of History Foundation. So if I don't know the answer to your question, I can get it pretty quickly from Eric, from JD, from people who know much more about this than I do. But hopefully that answers some questions and clears some things up about all this. Thanks for watching.